Hello, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable conversation that will focus on how building information modeling, or BIM for short, and the overall move to digitized workflows and processes in the AEC industry present significant opportunities, both globally, but also in the MENA region, the Middle East and Northern Africa region. In this conversation, we're going to look at these trends and deep dive into some key areas and topics that we believe are important for participants in the industry to be mindful of and have as focus areas as we move forward. My name is Thomas Carlson, and I work for a company called Knowledge Point. We are a service provider to the learning industry, and we work with training organizations and education and government bodies around the world. We have a particular emphasis in our work on digital skills and digital transformation. And our connection to the AEC industry is that we are an Autodesk learning distributor and have been for the past 15 years. I'm very pleased to be joined in this conversation by a group of experts who all have extensive background and experience of the AEC, the broader AEC industry. They bring with them, in addition to that, insight and knowledge from both the education, training, and commercial sectors. And furthermore, they all have experience of working and running projects in this space in the region that we're focusing on, so the Middle East and Northern Africa region. So I'm really looking forward to introducing you to our panel. But before we do that, please allow me to also quickly share what we're going to center our conversation around today. So we want to provide overview and conversation, insight and ideas around primarily 4 main areas that we see as connected. We would start by setting the scene and talking about what we mean by building information modeling. We are aware, of course, that many of you who are attending and listening to this session are already experts on this, but we'll do a high-level overview, and then we'll hear examples from the market, how it's been being implemented in projects today. We then want to tie this even closer to the region and look at the MENA region with some examples around the overall health of the industry, how different mandates are being put in place or not being put in place, and discuss what we see as both opportunities and challenges in that respect. I mentioned that our panel, what unites all of us who are on this panel, is a connection in one way or another to training and education. So we also want to focus on skills. How can we ensure that the existing workforce has the right skills that industry is looking for? And what can we do to ensure that the future workforce, so the education sector, is also walking in line with the requirements and the development? And finally, we're going to put forward some ideas, some food for thought, and reflections on what we believe as a group needs to happen in order to create the conditions that really can continue accelerating the adoption of BIM across the MENA region. So hopefully that's a very comprehensive agenda. We look forward to your feedback as well. Feel free to engage with us once you've heard our panel's insight and their perspective on this. And yeah, once again, welcome and thank you for joining us. So with that said, I'd now like to introduce our panel. And we have, as I mentioned, a group of true experts who come with deep, in-depth experience from industry. But rather than me introducing them, I'd like to ask each and one of them to do a short overview of who they are and what they're working on. We'll go around the table, the virtual table, and we'll do it in alphabetical order of first names. So if I may, I'd like to put the spotlight first on David Greenwood, professor from Northumbria University. David, if you wouldn't mind saying a few words about who you are.
Sure, thanks, Thomas. Hello, my name's David Greenwood, and as Thomas said, I'm professor at Northumbria University in Newcastle in the UK. I'm professor of construction management. My involvement with building information modeling began around 2006. And in 2011, I co-founded BIM Academy, a company that offers consultancy in digital construction and information management, and which now operates around the world. In 2013, BIM Academy became a limited company, and I'm one of its 4 directors. In 2017, it won a prestigious award from Times Higher Education as the best example of collaboration between industry and academia in the UK. My personal experience of BIM in the Middle East and North Africa came in between 2010 and 2017, when I was one of the leads on 2 European projects aimed at developing higher education in that region. The first was in between 2010 and 2013, targeted at construction management education in Syria, with some early stage introduction to BIM. The second, more specifically BIM orientated, was between 2014 and 2017, was concerned with developing BIM education in higher education institutions in Egypt, and involved around 10 Egyptian partners led by Cairo University. I'll hopefully make some reference to this experience later on. Lastly, my current academic interest is what I might call post-BIM, and focuses on the so-called Construction 4.0 future, for which the digitalization of construction information brought in by BIM has acted as a sort of catalyst. I hope to say a little bit more about that in, later on too. Thanks very much. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, David, for joining us. We'll move on to our next panelist, Habib Habib, if you wouldn't mind also introducing yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Habib Habib, as said. I consider myself as the experience with BIM, at least in my region. As I will kind of proceed with what David was mentioning and focus on education to start with. I'm also a faculty in a Lebanese American university, and I teach a lab-based course that is open BIM in general, and trying to spread my experience in the region and from my readings to the students so that it would be able to develop much quicker as they get hired in the future, and help develop the culture even further. But it's only mostly technical, not really related to the BIM concept as a whole. We in Lebanon do not yet have this kind of, I would say, master's degree that is focused on BIM, but we are trying to make some sort of twinning with another university to start offering that from the conceptual point of view / technical as well. Maybe we could, maybe I could benefit from this meeting to get to know David more with his expertise. Maybe we could do some future collab project together. Also, I work at DG John's company. It's an international company that focuses in a wide ranges of engineering consultancy, from design, not design, I would say, pre-construction to post-construction and facilities management. And we have established the BIM unit here. I would call it a BIM-enabled company as well. Well, thanks for the unit that I'm kind of a key personnel in, which is called the DG John's Academy. We offer internal training. That's why we became in partnership with the help of Thomas and Knowledge Point. We became officially authorized to train Autodesk products, of course, with the help of my colleague Jane here and Shara. I don't know if you've met Thomas, know them, it's as I said again, that the idea, the concept of BIM adoption is still highly technical, and and doesn't contain a lot of theory behind it and processes. As I also, because I always receive projects and I try to tackle different files, and sometimes if you find it hard to just gather the information and try to extract something that is unified, it's often difficult even when it comes to languages, etc. I can offer a lot of these case examples if in the future or during this session, or so that I would maybe to tackle on different to highlight on different issues that we deal with currently with the MENA while adopting BIM. That's what I'd like to talk about, mostly about myself and my work.
Thank you so much, and we will definitely hear more from your input here as we move forward. So thank you also for being here. I'll then move over to our third panelist, Anna Elush from Pro Design Training. Welcome to you as well. If we can ask you to also share some information on who you are.
Thank you, Thomas, for this opportunity. So I'm Hannah Elush. I'm Pro Design Training CEO and BIM expert. I'm also the CEO of Pro Design Corporation. It's a BIM expert office. I'm a founder of both of them from 2011. I'm a PhD in architecture and design since 2018. I'm also a university teacher in the School of Architecture. And I'm also a teacher in University of Central, Honoris Group, since 2012. I'm Autodesk certified instructor, Autodesk certified professional, and Revit architect and mechanical. And I'm animating workshops and training session on implementing BIM implementation. I'm trying also with my teams to assist during BIM project implementation, and we try to audit of BIM workflow in those projects. So I will speak after this presentation about the BIM workflow in the industry in the AEC sector. And I will showcase the Tunisian market and its benefits and barriers that can have in BIM implementation market. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We look forward to hearing more about that. So then we'll move to our next panelist, Juan Tenia Flores from Kio International. We'll let you also say a few words about who you are.
Thank you, Thomas. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's great to be with all these experts in the panel. So my name is Juan Tena. As you said, I work for Kio International Consultants. I am based in Abu Dhabi, the UAE. And I have a different dual role within the company. Within my role as Digital Services Director, I oversee the different implementation and strategies for our business in the sense of implementing BIM as well as other technologies. And as well, I'm responsible for providing services to external clients like asset owners, developers, contractors, consultants. And even we are collaborating with some universities to help them into considering BIM within their training plans as well, as we see as this one of the most important gaps that we should be focusing and helping the industry in order to move forward. So Kio is an engineering, design, project management consultancy. We have offices spanning 8 countries, mainly in the Middle East. We have an office in Europe, in Portugal as well. And we have more than 58 years of experience where we have led with vision, contributing to many of the world's most ambitious projects, iconic places, and remarkable experiences and prosperous communities. And in my role, as I said, in providing these services, either internally or externally, we focus a lot in upskilling our workforce or externally sharing our experiences and our knowledge implementing BIM in projects at this large scale that it happens in the Middle East. And it's one of our focus to help the industry in increasing their maturity. At the same experience that I had myself since I started in 2001 using the first BIM authoring tools. I've seen the same kind of maturity growing in the industry, where we have seen more adoption, more standards being in place as well, who have helped a lot of with the collaboration and same understanding of what BIM is. And therefore, I see that still the industry needs a lot of support in the sense of training, upskilling, and we're here to help the industry as well. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome as well. Then we'll move to our next panelist, Paul Woody from White Frog. I'll hand over to you to also share a bit of information on who you are. Sorry, Paul, you're on mute.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, Paul Woody. I'm founder and director of White Frog and also Focus HQ EMEA, which is another company looking at project management. White Frog was founded on the basis of my background in delivering training for BIM and for Revit. If I go further back, I studied structural engineering and then spent nearly a decade in Dubai modeling and designing aluminium smelters, a very niche market. But that involved back then, and this is going back to the 1990s, but that involved the understanding, communication of many different department heads within an aluminium smelter operation and extracting information from them so that we could model in 3D the process, the buildings, the mechanics of that operation to the extent that we could refine and improve the design and build new ones that were better. So it was BIM. We just didn't know it. We didn't have a term for it. It was just what we had to do. I then joined a small startup software company, which was a bit of a risk, but that was the Revit Corporation back in 2001. And that was then acquired by Autodesk, obviously, and away we go. But so since 2001, I've been teaching and evangelizing Revit and BIM, less and less Revit, more and more BIM as the years have gone on. But it's been 22 years of teaching, mostly of late teaching teachers how to deliver BIM courses and BIM training. So a knock-on effect of which is I've been directly or indirectly responsible for the training of several 100,000 people in this industry across Europe, Middle East, Africa, which is my territory. I've written 13 books on the topics, and the books are used in universities, colleges, schools, and professional training centers around the world in numerous languages. What I do a lot of now is sort of looking at strategy, educational strategy, and adoption strategies, especially trying to sort of bring some of the sort of the more operational aspects into the fray, and understanding the needs of the client and the operator as a driver to what's required at an information level from the capital works. So that's kind of my passion as we stand at the moment, and various bits that I want to talk about today about project management and about how we work through those processes. But yeah, lots to talk about today. Thank you, Thomas.
Excellent. Thank you to you as well, and welcome. We look forward to the continued conversation. And then finally, last but not least, for sure, we have our final panelist, Tarakash Anantakrishnan from Omnix International. If I can ask you as well to give everyone a short overview of who you are.
Thanks, Toms. Hello, all of you, and all of you have a very good day. My name is Tarakesh. I'm located in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. I work for a company called Omnix Engineering, who have been the Autodesk authorized distributors and also for around 35 years and an Autodesk authorized training center for the past 22 years. I technically head multiple departments here, like the LiDAR scanning and surveying department, the augmented reality and virtual reality department. We have a project management solutions department. So I keep heading all of this. So my experience spins around, so before that, like I'm a certified project management professional and also a civil engineer with a master's in business administration for project management. And I'm also an Autodesk authorized instructor. So I'm currently pursuing around the ISO 19650 certified practitioner certifications for part 1 to 5. And I'm also parallelly pursuing a master's in global BIM, which I'll be completing this year as well. And so my experiences spin around the digital project delivery, primarily using building information modeling and a common data environment. And that includes VDC as well. So I travel a lot in the Middle East, and one of my main duties involve educating stakeholders, inform and engage the business with the digital strategy, driving and upskilling of digital and BIM knowledge for stakeholders at all levels. Moreover that, I also currently research a lot in augmenting the frontline workforce using augmented reality solutions for the AEC industry, mainly taking the augmented reality to the construction site. It's an evolving technology, but lots of research goes into that process. So, so that's something. But having delving into all these technologies recently, but I come from a background where I started my career with manual drafting on paper, and then moved to CAD, and then moved from CAD to BIM, and then now it's all about BIM to digital transformation and digital twin. So it had been a really a long journey with plenty of experiences, and that's my short intro. And thank you so much, Toms. Over to you.
Thank you to you as well, and welcome. We appreciate that you and everyone on the panel are here today. As those of you listening have now heard, we have a group of true experts that bring with them a lot of experience that we're hoping to tap into today. And as I mentioned in the intro, so as organizers of this Knowledge Point are here, I'm Thomas Carlson, and you will also have seen that my colleague Maria Michewska is also here. So we are here to facilitate the conversation, but the spotlight is on these 6 experts that we will hear much more from. And with that said, without any further ado, let's jump into our different topic areas that we looked at in the introduction, and we'll walk through this. So where we wanted to start is to set the scene and talk about building information modeling, or BIM. What is it? Basically defining it and giving a real life examples of how it's being implemented, and then discuss what we see as the key opportunities, benefits, potentially also hurdles. Now, if you allow me to just start with maybe a lay member's definition of BIM, and then I'm sure that our experts will add their contribution to it. But I think it is of course important to mention that, but also listening, that this isn't necessarily a new concept. We can see that there's a history of looking at project management. How do we work more efficiently? How do we digitalize our workflows? In the introductions, we heard both CAD and Revit being mentioned. These are, of course, stepping stones toward where we are today. I think we can date back the initial seeds of this as a process, a concept, all the way back to the late 50s, early 60s, and then there's been an ongoing and continuous development that, of course, hasn't completed today either. But if I, from a very high level, start with just a quick definition of what we mean by BIM, then I would say it's a process for creating and managing information across construction project life cycles. And we know that construction projects are big and complex. So leveraging this type of workflow, BIM, can really ensure a few key benefits. One of the key areas that we hear a lot about when we talk about this is collaboration, ensuring that different stakeholders are all working on the same model, the same workflows, different teams from design, construction, engineering. So collaboration is one area that really stands out as a key value of implementing BIM. We also have tied to that is, of course, the communication. It's management of risks and costs in a more efficient way, predicting and mitigation of errors, reducing errors, of course, to achieve better outcomes and more efficiency. So it's all, if we really condense it down into one thing, it's about achieving productivity gains, which is aligned with a lot of the other trends when we look at digitization. So I just wanted to, as a very starting point, just for those who are listening, say it's not necessarily new. It's an ongoing process that the industry is looking into. It's part of a move towards digitization, a mega trend that we see across all industries around the world. But this is, of course, specifically for AEC. But with that said, what we want to focus this conversation here today about is, of course, the practicalities. What's happening in the real world? How are companies, individuals working with BIM in their day-to-day? And that's why we invited our panel to join us so that they can share experience and project examples from their day-to-day. In light of that, starting us off, we've asked Hanna Elush, who you've heard in the introduction, to share just that, an example of how BIM is being implemented from her perspective. So Hanna will do a brief presentation, an overview with sharing some of her insights, explaining some of the workflow, further adding to this very high level explanation of what BIM is. And then we'll open up the floor to our other panelists to add some of their reflections and feedback on that. So Hanna, thank you very much for wanting to be our first speaker of the day. I'd like to hand over to you now so that you can share yes, a practical example.
Thomas. Last, I want to speak about the BIM workflow in AEC industry case, because there is another case of academic case in universities. So I want to highlight the path of BIM workflow. It's that we are a client, we want a project. So we do a request for proposal with a program, planet timeline, project budget, and objectives. So here we will consult an architect appointment. We will have our architect and we will start of the study phase. Here around the round table, we will have a data analysis with BIM managers, site manager, architect, engineer, owner, etc. So the next step is the study plan. Here we will planify each single detail of project. We will prepare a BIM agreement and BIM models with, for example, Revit Autodesk, and we will share it in an Autodesk Construction Cloud. It's not necessarily Autodesk, but here in this context, I will speak about the Autodesk Cloud solutions. So in this context, everyone from design and coordination of engineer study will work from his side and publish his work in the cloud construction Autodesk platform for approval process. In the approval process, there is approval of studies by owner and project managers. We will publish it again and publish documents, models, and plans in the cloud solution. For consultancy, so there is a consultation and appointment of contractors in this phase. After that, we will move in on the start of construction. Here, we will just deliver RFI problems and punch list. I can explain after that the keywords. The next step is construction site monitoring model. We will establish progress report and send it to this roundtable again with our construction company in the execution phase. This is the main idea and BIM workflow in AEC by the industry case. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you for that overview. And I think that maybe immediately sparks your follow-up conversation. So obviously here in our interest now, we've talked about BIM, building information modeling, but we're also aware that there's another term that's floating around, which is virtual design and construction, or VDC. So as I think at this point, it might be useful also to define that as well, so that because sometimes those are seen as the same thing. Other times people look at them as very different. So I think I'd like to ask our extended panel whether anyone feels up to making a definition of VDC as well as part of our conversation here. So as I know, for example, that Habib, you may have some input on that particular point, so that we also include that here when we talk about setting the scene, so to speak.
Yeah, it just came so naturally, actually. It's just that our chairman just saw a post on one of our ex-employees winning a VDC championship, and it's as being considered as if it's some sort of a new trend that is kind of overtaking the place of BIM, and then here this kind of confusion and questioning started happening. And since I'm part of the academy, they started asking if we're really up to date, or like, it's just it's caused a little bit of confusion here. And they asked us to create some sort of awareness campaign within the company and to be able to tackle this with our clients. In case, for example, we've been asked why everybody's marketing VDC and why is it making it look like as if BIM is becoming old school, while it's kind of the same thing from my knowledge. That's the very simple thing, really. It's not really a big deal, but just that it should be tackled as a new buzzword. Exactly. That's maybe just to be aware of what's happening in the market. That's all.
I think if I may, just to give you my perspective on where these two terms sit. BIM, certainly in the UK and in sort of in Europe, BIM as a term is somewhat disappearing. It was never really fit for purpose, if we're being honest with ourselves. And the term BIM has caused as many barriers to the adoption of this process as anything else. And that comes down to the fact that we talk about building information modeling. And the two bookends of that, the building and the modeling, have meant that people have pigeonholed this process into being something that's about construction. It's about pretty pictures, that clash detection, and sort of the model, an architect's model that is then used to sort of, for marketing terms and for as I say, for sort of coordinating designs in a construction project. What we're heading towards now is a new term, which is simply information management. Sometimes classed as digital information management, but that digital word isn't required. And the information management acknowledges the fact that a number of things. One is that what we're interested in is information, not about a 3D model necessarily. It quite often is, but it doesn't have to be. But more importantly, it's about the whole life cycle of not just the asset that we're creating, but the facility that asset allows. In other words, the distinction between asset management and facility management, the facility management is about what the purpose of that asset. So how do the people operate? How does the building or the facility, whatever it happens to be, how does that allow a business to operate, a school to function, a home to house people? We look more at the purposes for which that asset is created and the information associated with that, as opposed to simply the bricks and the mortar and the timber to create that building. So for me, information management is a much bigger picture. VDC as a term looks at, by its very terminology, virtual design and construction. We're talking there about the specifics of the capital works. So we're taking a very small subsector, and I guess VDC is where people perceived BIM to be. So BIM was never meant to be that small wedge. It was meant to be the bigger picture, but the term held us to that. So by BIM kind of expanding information into information management, VDC takes up that reign of being the specifics of the capital works and the digital information flow through that construction project.
Thanks, Paul. That was quite interesting. So I would like to add my 2 cents to what Paul said just now. So for me, I see there is a thin line of difference between BIM and VDC, even though the underlying digital model that you create is common for both, but there's a thin line of difference. That is the purpose for which these models are used. That's the main difference between BIM and VDC, where BIM is used for collaborative, right from collaborative usage, right from design to construction, but VDC is the construction process itself. But fundamentally, the digital model you use is the same. So that's the thin line of difference. Now, the flow chart shown by Hannah was fantastic, with lots of flow charts going and the hierarchies. It was fantastic. So now all this, our discussion about the confusion between BIM and VDC and this flow chart, what was happening in the past decade was lots of BIM standards have been developed for so many years. There are multiple guidelines, principles, options. Each one has their own interpretation of BIM. So with so many options, BIM standards have become increasingly confusing. And so many professionals are struggling to keep it up. So here comes exactly what Paul said, the information management and information delivery, where it is put short. And thanks to the suite of ISO 19650 BIM standards, which now provide a unified approach for information management. So as Habib said, German standards, European standards, UK, Singapore, some systems are followed in Bahrain, Kuwait, Dubai, Saudi. It was like siloed and people's own way of following BIM process, but really, really a big thanks to ISO 19650. As Paul rightly said, it's just information management and information delivery, right from part 1 to 6. And we'll have to simply follow that, which is a unified process and which is fantastic. It's a huge topic that you can talk about for a week on ISO 19650. But putting in a nutshell, it is particularly important if you are using BIM. It is very important to understand ISO 19650. So putting in a nutshell, the key principle of ISO 19650, which is on information management delivery, is the minimization of information waste, because too much is not required. So producing too much information is a waste of time and resources. So while producing too little can lead to ill-informed decisions and mistakes as well. So to achieve this, the appointing party, which is the owner, must very clearly state the level of information needs and what they want. So that's the minimum quantity. And what's very important is the granularity of information, exactly what is required at the concept stage, exactly what is required at the detailed design stage, what is required at the construction stage and the as-built stage. So extra information is not required, as it is a waste of time. So the minimum quantity and granularity of information required to meet its needs is very important. So the information should not exceed the required level of information need. It should not extend beyond the scope, and it should not lack a specific purpose of its use. That's very important. And it should not duplicate information created by other task teams. That's also very important. And because if you see some of the CDE solutions, common data environment is ISO 19650 specific, so that duplicate information is automatically rejected by the systems. when I start collaborating in a common data environment. And also, this should not contain superfluous detail. So it is very important that BIM is no more BIM alone. It's gone. The BIM is no more BIM. It's just BIM with ISO 19650 is the standard now, which clears all the doubts about what is BIM, what is VDC, what kind of standards do we follow. But unfortunately, I see in some of the projects, there is a mix-up of ISO 19650 and the local standards and the custom standards. But I believe moving forward, it should be very strictly mandated by the owner and the PMCs that just follow the ISO 19650, because lots of things are no more relevant once you follow the principle of what Paul said: information management and delivery, LOD, BIM maturity. These are no more relevant. If we exactly follow what ISO 19650 says, we can solve all the issues in a project. That is a one-line statement by the ISO 19650 authorities. So that's my 2 cents. And thank you, Thomas, for this opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'd like to pick up on the stance, but I saw that David wanted to contribute, so I'll let you jump in first.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Yes, indeed. I think there are a lot of good points in both of those interventions. I think what Tharakash was saying about information and the way that the ISO documents have got it is exactly right. Certainly what Paul said about there's a real a sort of BIM weariness in the UK, at least, with people moving away from the term. And the bookends, the building and the modeling bit, are becoming less important, with information becoming the most important bit. I'd sort of row back a little bit from what he said about digital, because I think digital is key. The digitalization of information that BIM has brought has made it a kind of catalyst and opened a door to all sorts of other, I'm a bit wary of calling them technologies, but the technology-based processes, such as brought about by sensors, the Internet of Things, potentially blockchain. All of those things can now be experimented with in the construction industry and lead us to what people are generally calling construction 4.0, in line with industry 4.0, the new wave of operating in the construction and built environment. So I think the digitalization is important, but lots of other very good points there. Especially, yeah, also to pick on one of Paul's mentions, it's not just about the capital product, it's about how we use it as well. Thanks.
Excellent. No, that's really interesting perspectives. And I'd be interested in picking up, so we're now talking about standards, defining BIM, etc. I have a quite busy slide that I'll put in the background just to kind of explain where I'm going with my line of thought here. But there's a lot of talk about BIM mandates, that has been a key factor for driving adoption. And I realize that this is a busy slide, but it kind of tries to show how different mandates have been put in place on government level, etc. But if we focus specifically on the MENA region, we know that Dubai were early in this process. There is a certain level of a mandate in place. There's been Abu Dhabi have followed. There's initiatives at other areas, etc. I think related to standards, mandates, etc. So one question that maybe is a bit contagious, but that might fit this as a tag along to what we've started talking about is mandates the right way of going? And if it is, what is it that we're mandating? Are we mandating the process? Are we mandating tools? Are we mandating workflows, etc.? So if I start there, you've clearly referenced standards. Is standards, in your perspective, a step towards mandating? Do you think that's a way forward? So I see that Tarakesh is nodding, so maybe I'll ask you to just add a few your perspective on that, just specifically around.
Yes, Thomas. Actually, yeah, you rightly said, because I will relate to the previous discussion I had. ISO 19650 is the answer, because siloed information and siloed BIM standards across. You see, the slide itself explains, but it's going to be beautiful if all of this stuff becomes so simple with one unified standards across the internationally, across the nations, as ISO 19650 will be a most welcoming point. So a mandate, before mandating is quite easy, because what I feel is BIM awareness is not much required. Majority of the AEC professionals are already BIM aware and they know what is BIM. But the problem here is there a unified standard for them to follow? Like, because if you see within UAE, we have 7 emirates. The BIM mandate is not for all the projects. So we have a 20-story and 200,000 square feet rule. Then there are certain type of projects for which BIM is mandated, and there are certain type of projects where BIM is not mandated. So for the types of projects where BIM is mandated by the government or the owner, which is like hospital buildings, special buildings, or buildings which are asked to do by foreign authorities inside the UAE, so and so. But if there is a mandate, it is also a must to provide a standard, either a local standard that's defined or a unified standard where ISO 19650. I could see that majority of the projects I face now, ISO 19650 is already mandated inside, and slowly the old norms are going away. So that is a good sign. Mandate is also one way to make all the stakeholders participate in the project. The problem is an unmandated following of BIM procedure will lead to, again, siloed information, because we have some of the projects, we have multiple stakeholders, right from the owner to the main consultant, the PMCs, the subcontractors and the specialist subcontractors, plenty of them. There could be one for the facade, one for the electrical work, one for the concrete work. So if one of them is not fitting into the protocol and they are not submitting in the way, the standard we need, as suggested in the BIM execution protocols or the exchange information required documents, then it's going to be a big trouble. And all of them, if common data environment CD is mandated across the project, and some follow and some they don't, then it's going to be a problem. So a mandate is the key to make the entire set of stakeholders follow, right from the owner to the last level of the specialist subcontractor. We are all on the same page. That is going to be the main success of the project. It's going to save lots of time and lots of, it reduces cost and prevents lots of risk as well. So mandate is good, but mandate is extremely good with a supportive standard being provided to all the stakeholders to follow, right from the initiation of the project to the closure. So that is a must. So that's my 2 cents on this topic.
Thank you very much. And I see that your peers here want to react. So we'll go in the order that I saw that coming out. So Paul, do you, I believe you want to add or expand on this?
Yeah, I think if I can just reflect on the UK BIM mandate shortly, because in some respects, the UK government was one of the first to mandate BIM, but stopped shy of actually providing any detail, nor any guidance for the people that came under that mandate. So it was mandated for large capital works, capital centrally funded projects in the UK, but with no guidance available, no standards available as to how to do it. And that led to a lot of fragmentation, a lot of confusion, and not a lot of clarity in the industry. So I think, being first wasn't necessarily the best thing in that respect. But the output of that confusion was initially the 1192 documents for British standards, and then that led on to the ISO standards for 19650, etc. So the new countries coming along now are in a much better position to sort of use a mandate in an effective way, using internationally recognized standards that are proven and that we know work. I think the second point I'd like to make is that whilst the mandate that we had was quite limited in its scope, as I say, it was for very large capital projects that were centrally funded. So there was no commercial entities that really came on, or very few commercial entities came under that mandate, and very few projects came under that mandate. So it didn't really make that much difference. What has made a difference and is starting to be felt now is that we have some new laws. So we're not talking about recommendations or please use this and we'd be really grateful if you did. We've now got laws come through to do with building safety that mean that digital information has to be kept on projects over a certain size. And when I say size, I mean in terms of number of stories and size of structure, that you have to keep digital records of all information in order to comply with the law. And that now means that you can be arrested for not delivering this. So whilst it's not a law that you have to do BIM, an output of that law is that BIM is the way that you keep yourself out of jail. So that's making a much bigger difference than a mandate to please use these principles on projects.
Yeah, good point. That is definitely a strong driver. I see again that we have some reactions to that. I see that
that's
David,
a real mandate. Yeah.
You're eager to add to this.
It just brings me to a kind of general observation as to how do you get people to change behavior, and reward, persuasion, or fear. And Paul's touched on that nicely. And interestingly, I think from memory, Singapore were a pioneer in a big mandate of BIM, and there was reward involved in that. Companies were actually paid to invest in BIM. The UK, I agree entirely with Paul. The UK mandated BIM without anybody knowing what that mandate actually meant. But it did concern people. So there were some large companies who did think, oh, are we not going to win government projects unless we do this? We better start doing it. And, and confusion came out of that, but it was to some degree creative confusion, because out of that ultimately have come the ISO documents via the UK publicly available specifications. So I think, and finally, as Paul mentioned, the last fear point is with the Building Safety Act in the UK, which yes, you can go to prison now if you don't comply, and that is worrying a lot of people, and so it's using the third of those methods, or not using them, it's relying on the third of those methods for adoption.
No, very, very relevant points again. And I see that Joan is also wanting to add here. You also, of course, bring a lot of international experience, as we heard with you in the introduction. So
yes.
What's your take on this?
Yeah, one of the points that I wanted to mention was what just David mentioned about the rewards. It also came to mind about the Singapore mandate. And I think that for sure is something that the industry needs to have certain support on the adoption of technology. Large corporations are able to cope with the cost of training, upskilling, software cost, but smaller SMEs are not able to actually spend that amount of investment. And that support is needed for this type of companies, as well as educational entities like universities. But I think that this is very much needed in the industry, that reward is happening as well from the authorities level, because that will definitely support a faster adoption and a better adoption of the technology. Also, what I see is that, in my view, the ISO 1950, which I think is a great step for the industry to speak the same language. I think that now, step by step, we are now starting to all speak the same language, but this is just a framework for everyone having that common language. But of course, it will be needed for every country to have their own more detailed specifications that will be relevant to how do they see the information management in their countries. And this is already happening. The UK have done that. Spain, as an example, most of the European countries are already working on that type of detailed specifications for their countries. And in summary, I believe that the mandate is needed, but with certain support. In my opinion, that support should be more like a rewarding support. Of course, we all have responsibilities. And as Paul said, so it's not about having laws to actually make people responsible for that. We all as architects, engineers, we all know the responsibilities that we take when we design any asset. So similarly, with the use of technology, should be similarly understood by the industry.
Thank you. Again, very relevant points. And if I'm hearing, the feedback so far, it's definitely driven off standards, and then with a, an industry-driven, and reward-based supported approach by government rather than enforcement from the top down, because it simply is, I guess, also too rapid of a development. I saw in our chat function that's another relevant point here that Habib actually made, and I see that you want to add as well. But there's, of course, we're talking about digital technologies and work processes, and we know that the development here is super rapid. So what is it that a government entity, a government agency entity would be mandating? Once that's in place, it may already be outdated, I guess, in terms of what industry is working. So Bid, do you want to continue on that path, or was there another point you wanted to make in terms of this conversation?
No, it's the same topic. Just that, for example, in the region here, there's not a lot of mandating happening, but from the private sector's perspective, like large engineering or architectural firms, we're offering free training to encourage as a form of reward to everything related to BIM, and exposing to the culture in a more encouraging way. By the time mandating starts becoming more up to date, as I suggested in writing, I said that technology is developing very rapidly to an extent where legislators are no longer keeping track of it. Like, for example, I've taken part in a course from RICS at RICS that's supposed to tackle BIM certification. I've seen a lot of relevant information, but at the same time, I've seen a lot of outdated information that are no longer being used, and that's a course that I paid dearly for. So that's I hope that these kind of meetings happens often between different experts, so that we would be able to reflect what's going on so quickly, and maybe use the help of AI to get this done because it's becoming so we have to run quick, and it's not happening so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, no reflection on your slide, Thomas, but when we're talking about out-of-date information, and you've got 2017 planned introduction.
Yes, I know. I was hoping no one would notice, but I guess that does underline the point about keeping pace with the development, and also maybe using AI to get some accurate and correct data. So yes, guilty as charged. But maybe that. But maybe also to maybe round off this component, it sounds like we're kind of saying, standardization as said, but mandates may not. It's not a one size fits all for sure, and it's not a holy grail either for driving this forward. But just to loop in Hannah again, from your perspective, I mean, you're representing Tunisia, of course, with also international connections. Any reflection on how the conversation is going
Yeah.
in your region? Is mandates on the agenda, or is it industry driven?
Thank you, Thomas. This is the point. Here in Tunisia, the adoption of BIM is still in its early ages and stages, but there is a growing interest in the technology among architects, engineers, and construction professionals. So the government has also shown support for the implementation of BIM in the construction sector, with the Ministry of Equipment causing its special planning launch of BIM training sessions. So we are not speaking about this project of mandatory, but we are still implementing BIM and still doing training session to have these facilities for a BIM implementation. I think it will be a next step, but it's not for instance.
See, no, that's really interesting to hear, and I think all of you have mentioned training in one way or another. That's one of the key factors, of course, to bring people up to speed and making sure that there's also a common standard, I guess, and a common way of working. So, and as it happens, skills development, etc., is one of the topics we also wanted to really cover here in this call. So I'm would like to bridge over to that, but I'm just gonna check first whether anyone else wanted to add any further thoughts on this particular area before I kind of jump over to more about what needs to happen in terms of ensuring cross upskilling, etc.
I think just one sort of general note, and something that I've been saying for many years now, is that we'll know when BIM has been successful when we stop talking about BIM. And that's a phrase I've used many times on many different stages, but the concept of that is that, and this transition to information management, it sort of summarizes that, because this should be just a natural way that the industry manages its information. And, when we talk about BIM mandates and so on and so forth, perhaps we should be looking at the wider digital picture of that information management and the use of information is perhaps the way forward from an operations perspective. And therefore, BIM is a requirement of that bigger need for information to be available and managed in a holistic way. So I think for me, if I was advising a country now that's looking at this in its infancy, I would be suggesting that operational side of information management and what you do with the information is where you place your mandate. And therefore the BIM side of it is just what has to happen for that to be facilitated.
Right, so another good point. I see a lot of heads nodding, so I think that's
and Thomas particularly liked the way Paul said that one important thing. Now we can know that BIM is really successful when we stop talking about BIM. So that's going to be my key takeaway. Very well said, Paul. Thanks for that.
Perfect. And on that point, if I may, and this may be a bit of a contentious question, but do you see that on the horizon, Paul? So do you see us approaching that state, or how far away are we? And I know it varies depending on where in the world we are, but in terms of a general term, is it a vision, or is it a tangible state that we're actually approaching?
I think certainly, as both David and I have said, in the UK, people have gotten tired of the term BIM, but at the same time, so a lot of us are sort of are shifting across to using information management as a term, but in every case, we have to then in brackets put BIM, because no matter what we as sort of 20-year veterans of the industry think, when people look for something, when they go into Google, it's BIM they type in. So you know, I don't see it going away in any short term whatsoever. I can imagine that we've probably got another 20 years of seeing it before it is absorbed completely and stops being a topic in its own right.
Okay, I see again nodding heads. So but we you know, a good future state to look forward to, and I think you know, a part of getting there is, of course, you know, bringing everyone up to speed and making sure that, you know, everyone is aware of, you know, if we use the term BIM, what it means, and can work with both the processes, but actually also the tools that you know, make digital work processes happen. This leads us very nicely onto the next topic that we want to cover in this session. I mentioned in the introduction that what unites a lot of this panel is the fact that many of us are active in the education, training, and learning space. And getting people the right skills that industry is looking for is key in this transformation and moving to BIM and implementing these workflows. This may be a contentious statement, and I'm happy for our panel to disagree with me, but I think it's fair to say that no matter where we look in the world, that there's a significant skills gap facing the AEC sector. And I would even state that the AEC sector is in a worse state than many other sectors. I think that AEC, a lot of reports have shown this, for example, is far behind, for example, the manufacturing sector and other sectors in terms of digitizing workflows and work processes. Furthermore, it could be argued that the MENA region, so the Middle East and Northern Africa region, is in a worse state than comparable regions around the world. And there are some explanations for this. One is the fact that there's a high general rate of youth employment. There's typically a lower rate of female participation in the workforce, and there's an ongoing mismatch of, you know, graduate skills versus what employers are looking for. Now, this is, of course, a very bleak picture that I'm painting here. And as I said, I'm happy for anyone to challenge me on it. But what I would like to do next is to invite one of our panelists to give us an overview of what is happening in the education sector in the MENA region. What type of initiatives are being run, and how are universities and schools responding to this skills gap that we know exists? I'd like to ask David to take us through that, and I'll just update the screen here, and then you can take it away, David.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, what we see here is just a snapshot, but before we do that, Thomas's comments about skills gap. In most of the surveys, I think construction and the industries around built environment, or the sectors, usually come next to bottom in terms of digital skills gap, with probably only agriculture and fishing below us. So it's really quite considerable. What I've got here is just a snapshot, and it comes with one thank you and two apologies. I'll do the apologies first, and that is apologies to any of the institutions I've missed off this, and some of my fellow panelists may know some that are missing. It is just master's education in the MENA region, and that's, I'll tell you why I'm just focusing on that in a moment. The other apologies is that there are many other ways of upskilling the workforce than universities, and than university master's courses as well. So this is the only information I've got. Other colleagues are much more experienced in terms of the training options, the continuing professional development courses, the introductory courses being offered in the region. So I rely on them for that. So this is just my snapshot. And that's where I want to say a thank you to two colleagues in Egypt, Professor Mohammed Marzouk of Faculty of Engineering at Cairo University, and Dr. Mustafa Al-Hawari of the Techno-Engineering Observatory in Cairo, and also to their students for doing a little bit of a research, up-to-date research on who's offering what. So there's the list that we came up with. To me, I just explained that the institutions that are featured in bold, as I alluded to earlier, are ones that I've worked with in terms of introducing BIM-related masters to their curricula. So mainly Egypt, Cairo University, Joan University in Cairo, and Ain Shams University, Egypt. Also Syria, but because of the unfortunate problems there, since we launched some construction engineering management masters, it's the BIM aspects have been taken up by something called the Syrian Virtual University, and I think that's probably self-explanatory. To me, and I may be wrong in this, it might be to do with my experience, but I think the majority of master's education in this, in the MENA region, is being done in Egypt, the Gulf states, including Qatar, and in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I may be wrong in that. I asked why masters. Well, there are a lot of courses, as you'll see from the footnote. Many architectural engineering departments in the MENA region have modules within their undergrad courses of various degrees of intensity, but the master's courses are where graduates are really upskilled in BIM processes and technologies. So I hope that's a reasonable opener. It's not definitive, so apologies for that, but it's perhaps a starting point that we can talk about. I'm happy to, particularly the ones I know, to discuss them a little further, but I'll probably best open it up now, Thomas.
Thank you. No, that's a really good good overview, and I mean hopeful as well, because there's a number of institutions working on this. So I'll let the panel react. If I may also add a question then alongside of, well, actually no, I'll see that Hannah and Juan would like to add some input. So Hannah, why don't you start, and then Juan can follow.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. David. Just a little bit point that I want to add about Tunisian Institute. There is the School of Architecture and Urbanism of Tunisia that did its first BIM Master Education degree in this university year, 2022 and 2023. So it's a government school. This is so important to highlight because there is so many initiatives from, let's say, private universities, but not government. Government schools, it means that there is an initiative that reveals that there is an awareness about the Tunisian market and government to implement BIM. And it began from university, as everybody knows. This is the point.
Thanks, Hannah. That's very useful. Thanks. I'll add it into my my collection. Thank you.
It's too recent. It's just ongoing.
Thank you. And Juan, we'll hand over to you.
Yes, thanks. So thanks both for this information. I think that it is important to probably point out that these courses, these masters that we see on the screen, are more topics related for specialists. So if you would like to specialize on the topic of building information modeling, then you will choose to do this type of specializations. But I think that we need to go one step back and see that what Paul mentioned earlier, that when we stop talking about BIM is when we'll see that BIM is actually happening And I think the same happens with education. If we educate our students at the universities using the processes, the standards, and the tools that they should be using for designing, for coordination, for collaboration, is when we will see this gap that we are seeing now in the industry being actually tackled. And I think that that's the point where we should be focusing more on how can we help our mainly university students to embrace the use of technology for them to consider while designing. And they don't see it as an add-on, but as part of their practice.
Very good point. I see that.
Yep, totally agree.
I see that Paul also wanted to react to that.
Yeah, I think a couple of points really. Firstly, that my sort of comment about needing to embrace BIM in the core of what we do is never more true than when we look at academia's response to BIM, which has historically been one of looking at it as a new topic. And we, as I mentioned in my introduction, we supply training materials and classroom resources to sort of universities across the world. And one almost universal truth is that schools of architecture tell us that their curriculum is already too full to allow for topics like BIM to be introduced, which is incredibly frustrating because it should be welded into the sort of infrastructure of that course, not seen as a separate topic. And so what you end up with a scenario where people sit through 7 years of teaching to be an architect, only then to have to sit through some postgraduate courses to be useful to the industry. And that, unfortunately, is an international problem that we have with many education offerings. I would also say, to comment on this, is certainly my experience of the Gulf region is that there is a historic trend for people to travel overseas for education amongst the Gulf states particularly, and my experience is less so in North Africa. But so I think that just because we have a relatively limited number of schools offering the master's courses, that doesn't mean to say that the expertise is lacking. It could be that a lot of people are sort of traveling overseas to get that education and then coming back, because it is a very transitory workforce as a whole. But as I say, that's more sort of Gulf states than elsewhere.
No, I concur with that, Paul, and well, with both points, both the point of the schools of architecture, which, I recognize that entirely. And the second point as well, because quite a few of the students who have come through the courses that I've got in bold here that I've been involved with have then gone on to do doctoral work in the United States, for example. So there is that migration, which is a fact. It's not necessarily a good thing, but it's a fact. So yes, I agree.
Thank you. And I think one of the points you made, Paul, is of course about alignment between what's being taught and what skills industry are looking for. So, and several of you are representing employers. You have employees, most likely fresh graduates as well, who are working in your business, or you're working with employers who have that scenario. So does anyone have a perspective of how do we bridge it? How do we make sure that the future workforce is trained on or has the knowledge and skills that industry is looking for? Does any input from someone about a practical way of bridging that gap? Who should start, if I put it like that? Is it the industry? Is it the institutions? What's your opinion? There isn't a right or wrong answer there, I think, but it would be interesting to hear, especially if you're working for a commercial company. Are you seeing this? Is this a challenge when you look at your your strategic plans and your future growth, etc., that there isn't enough skilled graduates that you can access. Is that a topic that you're seeing in your day-to-day? David, you want to volunteer?
Yeah.
Multiple questions in one. Sorry for that, but
I'm probably the least equipped to answer that question, so I'll go first and be very brief. But I was quite interested when I asked my colleagues in Egypt to ask their students. I was quite interested and to find out how frustrated graduate students were when they left their courses where they are being introduced to, let's call it BIM, whether they were frustrated, they were very happy, they felt they've been adequately prepared when they go into employment. I didn't get much feedback, but that's kind of the other side of the coin as well. It's not just industry's needs being met. It's actually the aspirations of the educated graduates being met by their employers. So it's a two-way thing.
Absolutely. That's also a relevant point, of course.
Thomas, I would like to add a point here. It's a very good topic that's running. That's bridging the gap. That's a key word. So as the graduates come out and face the real world, the frustrations and discussed by both Paul and David, I agree to all of that. So at Omnix, what we do here is at the engineering division, where there is a BIM projects division, we help students to do their interns here. And we have even seen some of the students who are learning in UK universities, who are residents of Dubai, but they go to UK for learning and then they come back on the vacation. So we give them internship where they can work inside along with our project team for 3 to 6 months. And they gain a real practical knowledge of what happens in real world industry compared to what they learn theoretically. But probably, yeah, I'm not saying 100% is theoretical, but the real world is different. When you involve in real world projects, it's no more white collar stuff, So they learn the real problems, how to tackle it, the risks involved, and they get a matured approach by having a hands-on real project. So at Omnix, we help. So we have lots of students who go abroad to study in countries like UK and US. During their vacations, they do their internships in Omnix inside the engineering department. We welcome all the students from any part of the world to be with us. And that is also a part of our company's policy as per the ISO standards, that we have to help the upcoming generation. We need to transfer the knowledge to them in a very practical way so that they finish the internship and then go and work and meet the real world. Yeah. So I would like to register that point there. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. And I see that we have some feedback immediately from Paul to begin with.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. I think, to me, from my perspective of being behind the scenes of education, it's not very often that I stand up and teach anymore, but we look at curricula and we look at educational strategy, and there's an awful lot of points really that I could raise on this subject, not least of which is that we've got to acknowledge the perspective of each individual party, and the fact that you can't simply say that one size fits all for education in this topic. We have to understand who we're talking to and what they need to know. And if I may, I'm going to share very briefly a little a bit of the work that I've been doing here. Can you see my screen there?
Yes.
Okay. So what we've been doing, and this is a piece of work that's been done over quite a few years to understand the requirements of a career progression and understanding how do we take somebody through from, first of all, understanding where they are in the market, where they are in terms of their knowledge, and how we can help them to sort of get to the next level, but also in how we define the curricula for different courses aimed at different audiences, and what prerequisites we would expect them to have in order to sort of sit those courses and examinations. So this particular slide that I've got here is a kind of an indication of expectation with regard to how we would expect somebody to come into this predominantly, design-led, construction-led sort of approach to digital information management, and how we might sort of get to what we would expect in terms of experience for somebody to be able to do certain roles. And I must sort of say at the beginning here that the job titles are irrelevant. Everybody you speak to has got a different idea of the job titles, and too many years of my life have been spent debating what people should be called. So I'm not going to get into that, but I've given them nominal titles here just to sort of see where we're aiming. So this was the objective, was to try and sort of point at where you should be and what your experience would be if you're in certain positions. So how do we do that? Well, the next step was the hard bit. And so what we then looked at was then to look at the different standards. So I've got here ISO's parts, and 19650 in particular, but also you may or may not be familiar with 41001, which is, to me, the kind of the driving force of BIM, because 41001 focuses on the facility and the operational use of data. So it's the OpEx side of things. It's understanding the organization that's going to be procuring this asset and therefore this data, and building the FM systems appropriately based upon their requirements. And all of that essentially builds your OIR, your organizational information requirements, which then informs the whole process of BIM and what data is required for project work. So what I've done here is to pick out the tasks and responsibilities associated with these different standards, these different frameworks, and understanding how they all fit together, and what, the sort of the way in which they arrive. Added to which there are several pieces in here which are more anecdotal, that are more about the process we use, and are not necessarily defined in standards terms. And at the bottom of the table, in fact, we even start to look at, interpersonal skills, good oral communication, etc. Things that we'd expect certain roles to encompass. So having defined this list, we then look at where we would expect those skills to actually be applied. And in doing so, we can then break those columns down and define the curriculum for each of those roles and those levels of responsibility. So if we're building a course for coordinators, then we only need to look really at the aspects which are applicable for coordinators, and then build a curriculum accordingly. So applying this sort of approach to an organization and say, okay, this is the sort of standardized approach. Now we can then tailor that either to a geographic region or to an organization and say, how does this fit in with your process? And review those the right-hand side of that table in order to then understand where those skills apply. And then we can start to build a picture of education that's required in order to provide for the future of that particular sector. So that's kind of, as I say, there's an awful lot of thinking and an awful lot of research gone into what I'm showing you here in a nutshell. But that's the kind of approach we take in terms of educational strategy. And I must say that one thing that is that we've had to do in the process of this is to distinguish between project management artifacts and construction management functions. So when we talk about things like a risk register, the creation of a risk register and the maintenance of a risk register is a project management artifact. But the line items within that health and safety risk management, in terms of falling off heights or lifting heavy boxes, they're construction management functions. And as such, sort of separating the two out allows a little more sort of distinction in what is otherwise potentially a very, very big sort of scope of project management and of managing the process. And so in this particular process that I've defined here, this is project management process, not, you know, who's going to dig the hole, who's going to design the concrete or the steel work. That's construction side of things. But so that's just a little point I wanted to make.
So we've now heard, seen a very comprehensive overview that Paul shared with, how to think around what skills to include in different training initiatives. Our starting point there was, of course, the review of different education initiatives and academic education. I think it's equally relevant to also look at it for the existing workforce, so those of us who are in industry or not students, but actually working in industry today, and what skills we need. And I'd like to open the floor and ask for your input, because you are involved in training initiatives, whether it's corporate trainings, it could be of individuals, it could be retraining. Do you have input on what the most, what type of skilling programs have good impact? Is there a particular approach that you're seeing is more successful than others? If you have some examples, perhaps from your business, then that would be an interesting perspective. Do we see a difference between how the education sector should look at this compared to how a training provider, someone like your organization, should look at equipping people with BIM skills, if we stay with the term BIM? Anyone who wants to jump in?
If just in general, and this isn't sort of specific to the region, but just in general, I think the distinction between those two perspectives of existing workforce versus academia, I think it's important that in many cases with existing workforce, we're supplementing digital skills to their existing knowledge and experience of doing their job. And therefore the courses can be more focused on those digital aspects and on those parts that we need to add. With academia, I think we need to look at incorporating those within the general workforce, the general workflow. So not necessarily highlighting them as being different, but simply saying that, yes, you need to do this, and this is how you do it. The digital approach is how you do it. So I think we do need to look at digital in academia, not as a module, but as incorporated across all modules of the courses that are available.
Thank you. Good thing. I see that Tarakash wanted to react to that.
Yeah, Thomas. I mean, first of all, I would like to agree with what Paul said, but there is a very distinct differentiation between the education sector and the actual working professionals. It's different. And when it comes into working professionals and corporates, again, we subdivide, like how we see Monix is, again, we subdivide them into the classification of owners, consultants, contractors, and specialist subcontractors. Because when BIM, when put into practical way of approach, is different for all these different stakeholders. For example, owners, we have done plenty of trainings and BIM implementation for owners across the Middle East, where there are departments where they don't perform any design authoring. They are going to not model anything, but then the specific things are very important. So we do a research and customize curriculum for them. Then the way the BIM starts and flows and ends inside and consultant's office till he issues a IFC issued for construction package, things are different. And a contractor who receives the IFC package and starts from the detailed design and proceeds to construction to produce shop drawings, it's a different workflow. And beyond BIM, making an informative BIM during as-built stage and handover with COBE and ASA data, things are different. So we again subdivide this and go on an industry-specific, stakeholder-specific training where we have found lots of success, because one solution is not going to fit all. Because BIM is, the concept of BIM varies across the stakeholders, and the way the project flows, it's different. And for the owner, it's entirely different. We have done lots of interesting trainers towards on the owner side. You have a QA/QC department who concentrate more on quantity takeoffs and estimation, and then approvals and design checks, where some of the stakeholders are not into it, but they could do that internally. So this has given us lots and lots of success. And we have done this even in government organizations across the globe, where we have implemented this for the Bahrain ministry. We have done something. We have also worked very closely with the Abu Dhabi municipality in helping them making the BIM mandate for the infrastructure projects, because that's something very important. Where the building side is mandated already, but then Abu Dhabi municipality recently mandated BIM submission for infra projects that involves roads, tunnels, and bridges. So we have been going and helping and hand-holding lots of consultants to be in the list of approved list of ADM, where they can submit their BIM model. So so educational sector is one thing, but when things comes out practically into real world, we first go by the stakeholder differentiations, and then again you have the discipline subcategories with ARC, Struct, MAP, Landscape, ID. It goes on, and then finally combining all of them, how they collaborate. Because BIM is not about learning a single tool. It's like learning one software program. One cannot go back and contribute to the BIM inside the concern. It's an ecosystem. So there are multiple disciplines involved, multiple type of stakeholders involved, but the key concept in BIM is the collaboration. Finally, how all of them are going to collaborate in a common data environment is very crucial. So recently, the past 4 to 5 years, we have been paying heavy concentration on educating the community on common data environments like Autodesk Construction Cloud, where there is a heavy demand for Autodesk Docs, Autodesk Build, etc., etc. So these kind of technologies before the pandemic were like, it was like good to have solutions, you know, or has become now a mandate, a must to have solution post pandemic. I have not seen any major projects without a CD environment. So this is another place where you need to train the workforce, because BIM without a CD could be half cooked. So they need to participate well in that as well. So this is where we take heavy care. And not only that, there is a system study involved before we go and train a particular corporate. It's an initial system study involved, and there's a skill matrix Excel sheet developed, and it's being filled properly. Then we need to go and propose a customized solution for each department, something very close to the metrics of what Paul showed, but that's extensive. But this one is going to be specific for the corporate within their organization and the employees. So once that's done, then the plan is rolled out. And what happens after the initial phase of the training is when they learn all the BIM tools in the ecosystem, but when the employee goes and sits in front of his computer, starting to work on a live project, things are different. So we have our experts, we plan to post our experts on site with these organizations, where they will handhold them on a pilot, which is very important, because that is what is going to teach them the real world stuff or a real world project. And then once they are good to go with confidence, and slowly we come back. So this is how a successful implementation and training is approached by us, where we have found lots of success this way. There could be more models available, but I'll be very happy to listen to that. But this is something, an approach what we take, where we have found great success in this so far.
Well,
Thank you, Thomas.
No, thank you. That's a very good overview, and as you say, it kind of resembles what we saw previously as well in terms of thinking about the broader skill set that's required. I see that Habib would like to expand on this, so I'll hand over to you to add your feedback.
Yes, since we're talking about education, we also need to mention culture. We're trying to spread the culture of BIM, irrespective whether it's coming from the academic part or the work, or the governmental perspective, or the syndicates in general. Like when you want to spread the culture, you need to work on a lot of lobbying. When it comes to academic partitions, what I tried to do with the past years, I'm speaking of me personally as an educator when it comes to my current university, which is LAU, Lebanese American University. I gave these courses as an open lab course that tackles BIM in general, and I offer internship to help students be exposed to what's going on in the region, in real life. And this is helping them finding better opportunities within the MENA region as well. That's when it comes to the younger generation. But for example, to the governmental generation, my company took part in a bidding for the Lebanese prisons. They were trying to create to use common data environment and create as-built models for their prisons, and use the facility management services like Archibus that had recently joined Autodesk Build to be able to manage these day-to-day issues. So we're trying to, in a way, introduce BIM as a solution to modern-day problematics. Not only to maybe help it transform into a mandate, or make it a legal thing to be forced by the government and applied by the public. And that's what I wanted to add. That's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's also useful insight to hear, and I see that we have some further reactions. David, you were also wanting to add your perspective on this.
Yes, thanks, Thomas. Just a very quick one in terms of, I think it was Paul's initial comment about whether, let's call it BIM again, as an individual subject or something that's spread through the whole curriculum. It just reminded me, and I've been in university education for a long time now, it does remind me that years and years ago, we were actually teaching Word for Windows to students with manuals to do it. We then went through a phase where we kind of expected them to know how to do that. The next was Excel, teaching students how to use spreadsheets. It's become an expectation. Incidentally, other products are available, but there we go. And it's not beyond even my vision to see that students are going to be coming in with the ability to code. So engineering and architecture students are going to be able to code in Python or whatever. So and it's maybe touching on the culture. I suppose the digital culture is coming through, and that it's just an observation rather than a major contribution.
No, but I think it's again a relevant example of how we need to think more broadly about. It's not just a software tool. It's more the competency set and the skill set. And I guess if you have some core skills, the parallel to Word and Excel is a good example. No matter what job you have these days, if you work in an office, you're expected to have those skills. I think coding, maybe an understanding of project management in terms of collaboration with others, digital workflows in general could very well be a de facto standard. But I guess that what we've heard so far is as well that we may not be there just yet, but that's why it's so important to focus these training initiatives on the broader end-to-end skill set that we saw Paul demonstrate very nicely when he shared his screen with the different all the different areas that one needs to master to be a BIM manager or a BIM coordinator. And I see, Paul, that you want to react to this, so that's maybe a perfect segue back to you.
Yeah, in terms of perfect segue, it just so happens that David's university, the University of Northumbria, we've worked with them over the last few years to develop a series of courses that offer coding for designers. So either in terms of making off-the-shelf software do more than it does, or in terms of actual data management and data mining of what's available there. So that kind of that is definitely a trend that we're seeing here. That kind of software development and then that kind of big data usage is coming to the fore in the industry. But I think what I wanted to say in terms of just to sort of build on what Tarakesh and Habib said around the sort of the bigger picture of implementation and seeing the adoption of BIM take hold properly. And part of that, I do think we can take lessons from project management. I've mentioned project management. It's a particular sort of flavor that I'm sort of very interested in. But looking at some of the trends that we take from that project management approach to how we deliver BIM, in terms of ensuring that we've got an embedded process, that we've understood the process, that we've documented the process, and we've embedded that process within the learning, but also the operations of how BIM is deployed, and that's built upon good governance, that we're meeting all of the mandated requirements as we do so. And that therefore provides us with an audit trail and a quality control procedure by following those processes. And I think that if we can do that, then we can really get to grips with the risks, the risk sort of schedule of not following this, of not delivering data on time, of not receiving feedback on designs and on data that we send, but also really getting under the skin of what the benefits really are of this, and not just doing BIM for BIM's sake, but really kind of getting under the skin of the corporation and understanding what is it we look to achieve by adopting BIM, and then making sure that we kind of realize those benefits as we work through the adoption process. And as trainers and as educators, we have a responsibility not to lose sight of those objectives, and to make sure that we don't go into a practice with all of the answers. That our first job as educators should be to listen, and should be to understand what is it we are trying to do. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? Are the two questions that I keep telling my staff to ask all of the time, so that we're not going in there and we're sort of second guessing, or we're assuming that we already know what it is they're trying to do, and that we tailor the training or the education to the objectives of that either individual or that corporation.
Again, very, very good points. And since it built on both Tarakesh and Habib's input, I see that Tarakesh would like to add here as well. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, Thomas. Thanks, Thomas. Actually, more than me adding, it's just a quick question to Paul, just for a better understanding, just to get his views. It was quite interesting when you said you have been teaching some coding related stuff to the students who are coming out. But then the recent AI tools online like ChatGPT coming out and easily codings are generated on Dynamo, Python, Lisp kind of a stuff. What do you think, Paul? Like how this disruptive technology, or how much this is going to be disruptive for the young generations coming out?
I think
particularly on the coding part.
Well, I think it's a very, very good question, and I don't see it necessarily as being disruptive as it is offering us a unique opportunity. What I would say about the courses we're running on coding, you cannot ask ChatGTP to create something about which you know nothing. You can't, and any AI is going to produce something, and if you don't know, as a professional in any industry, if it produces something and you've got no way of knowing whether what it's got in front of you is good or bad, then there's no you'd be irresponsible to issue that information. But secondly, how you phrase the questions of what you want a tool to do is just as important. And one of the outputs of the courses that we deliver on coding is not necessarily that we expect an architect to be able to write software, but that an architect can at least have a conversation with a professional developer about what it is they want and how they want something to work. I've many times in the past, I've been in a scenario where we've procured development work, software development work for different clients or for ourselves. And we sit down in a meeting and we tell them what we want and we discuss it at length, and they all nod their heads and they all agree, they all understand exactly what we want. And then they come back in a month's time and they deliver something that's got no resemblance whatsoever to what we asked for. Because their understanding of they don't understand our market, they don't understand our perspectives, and they have their own opinions on things. So being able to talk like a developer, which it happens to be the topic of a book by one of David's colleagues at Northumbria, who helped us develop the courseware. Being able to talk like a developer, being able to discuss that in terms of the way you develop software, in terms of sprints and in terms of delivery and user interface and that sort of thing. That's what we need to teach, not necessarily we don't necessarily want to turn out a sort of a hybrid architect software developer.
Thanks, Paul. That was quite interesting. Just wanted to know a view. So I temporarily took a small role of Thomas. Now back to Thomas.
Yes, it's a very interesting conversation. I think very relevant for the time and age we're in with ChatGPT and fears about AI replacing jobs, etc. That I think we will see that actually many professions and many industries, this ability to ask the right questions, interact, and use AI, particularly machine learning, as a way of amplifying work and removing the tedious aspects rather than replacing.
Sorry, one final point on that is that what we are using ChatGPT or not ChatGPT, but coding versions of AI, what we are using that for is interoperability. So where we might have in the past, we might have waited for a tool, something new comes out in one particular software application, and we want another software application from another provider to be able to access that information and communicate and make use of that in our process. Now we can use AI to form the links for us. And so we know what we've got over here as an open API, and we've got over here as an open API, using those sorts of AI tools to sort of join the dots across the bridge is where we're seeing real advantage.
No, really interesting. I'd also like to loop in Habib, because I see that he's been wanting to add to this topic as well, I think. So please go ahead.
Yeah, since everyone now is talking about coding in general, I've just actually last week finished giving a course to my colleagues about Dynamo. And visual programming can be accessible to even non-coders and makes it easier for everyone to tackle small issues. And since the guys that I was training were mostly interested in non-graphical information, which made it easier And since David mentioned Excel, for example, I tackled how to exchange information between Revit and Excel. And since most of the models we receive are very messed up when it comes to information, so it was difficult to extract this kind of information. So we've, even while giving the course, the attendees starting suggesting solutions, and they immediately starting grasping this way and modifying those nodes into something that is useful for existing projects. And I was amazed of how this was just immediately adopted, and the amount of thirst that was available out there. So it's a small sample of 6 multidisciplinary professionals. What if it was spread to the whole company? What if this collective expertise has been spread elsewhere in different branches? What it made and how it affects the productivity in general? I think it's everybody is heading towards programming, and maybe only visual programming is a step further. And of course, ChatGPT or any sort of intelligence is supposed to answer only those with high expertise, as Paul answered. You need to ask the right question in a very correct way so that you would get the right outcome of it. So otherwise, you just get rubbish, I would say.
Okay, exactly. I think this is a super interesting area, and one that, as I said, will be high on everyone's agenda as we move forward, given what's happening in the development. I would like to continue it in a follow-up session. I think we've had a very broad coverage now in terms of education and skilling programs, etc. What I think I'm hearing in terms of really trying to summarize on the highest level is thinking broadly about skill set is important. We need to look at this as it's more than just learning a tool or a specific process. It's really about the end-to-end flow and having a broad understanding of collaboration, project management, you name it, coding, a broad skill set, and that's something that is ongoing, but maybe that we need to continue having a strong focus on it as industry participants. Now, for those listening, we've also, as a general sense in this conversation today, covered quite a lot of ground. We've talked about, now specifically around education, training, skills development. We've talked about, standards, made an overview of how we see BIM and the concept and where it's evolving, etc. So quite broad, but really interesting. It's been really interesting to hear everyone's perspective, and I thank you for sharing your experience and thoughts on these topics. We are coming towards the end, so to round us off today, I would like to go around the table one final time, and if I may ask you, with the audience in mind, those who are listening to this, what would be your top area that you think really needs to happen to set the conditions for BIM adoption, if we stay with BIM as the topic? And this could, of course, be, since we've covered a lot of broad ground, it could be at the very top level what nations need to do, or if you think it's more about what the education sector, a company, or an individual. I'll leave that up to you based on what you feel. But if I may, put you a little bit on the spot, what is your 1 or 2 top tips for the audience in terms of really making sure that they can get started on the journey of BIM? And I see that Harikash is volunteering immediately. That's great. So then you are more than welcome to get started.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Basically, when it comes into a successful BIM implementation and adoption, number 1, as you said, if it is mandated, then there is no more questions. We have to adapt it and follow it. It's forced, which is either at the government level or the owner level. Number 2, small firms who are individually working could implement within themselves to find success in delivering designs. But then once they come out and they want to be able to bid for projects that involves collaboration with multiple stakeholders, then they have to follow the protocol and start learning and implementing it at a higher level. So implementing BIM is not an overnight process. This should be very clearly understood. It's not an overnight process, and it's directly proportional to the organizational size or the project size in which the organization is going to participate, and also the number of disciplines and the staff. But however, it takes time, care, and also a real sense of purpose to reach a repeatable BIM workflow. So some of the key factors to consider while implementing BIM, what I would say is like understanding the incentives. That's very important. I think our conversation started with that, where the Singapore government provides incentives. So, and not only that, we also need to think about the incentives of adapting BIM and what internally my organization gets out of it. So understanding the incentives, then establishing a proper goals and vision is important. And having a plan of action, that's important. Then evaluating and measuring the progress is also important. So for example, when you talk about understanding the incentives, according to a report by Dodge Data and Analytics in 2021, it was titled as Accelerating Digital Transformation Through BIM. So some of the top 5 benefits identified were like improved ability to manage complexity, improved design quality, reduced errors and rework, better ability to meet customer and design requirement. And the last one, which is the 5th one, is increased stakeholder buy-in. Okay, so BIM process centralizes the project data. It makes it easy for all the stakeholders to participate, reducing errors, etc., etc. So the initial investment of time and effort, so that leads to a substantial benefit that that continues to add up over time. Okay, because we do lots of lessons learned registered from each project, which will help you to have lots of success with the next project. Now, establishing goals and mission is also very important, which is a second key. So this is the why of your implementation. So what do you want to work to look like in 6 months, in 1 year, or in 5 years? That's very important. So for many, the answer comes from the list of incentives that they want improved ability to manage complexity, improve design, etc., and mainly to avoid rework. Yeah. So you could aim to shorten the project timelines by some percentage. Like some firms may find that their change management process is quite tedious, and for some, like it gives you for some, it's a BIM goal might be shorten the revision process. Goals might vary, but whatever it is, this gives you a measurable way to track your progress towards your overall vision. That's very important. So then having a plan of action, which is the third key, is very important. So knowing where you want to be with the BIM is the first step. So after that, it's all about how to get there. Okay, that's the second step. So this is a good time to evaluate your current process and decide where you need to invest. Do you and other staff members need training? Do you need additional software programs, etc., etc., etc.? So a good plan of action will address like investing in training. That's very important. Developing standards and templates. That's again very important because BIM involves plenty of documentation to be really successful. Then determining if you will need further software and BIM tools inside your ecosystem. Then practicing with the pilot is very important for success. Then again, investing in training is the key, which was the first point. To save time and money, seeking training is one of the best things you can do. So that's that. So there is no question. There's no doubt about it. Training is the key for the first success. There is no shame in making sure that you are doing it effectively. Yeah. So it's very important. And the word investment is also very important because by preparing skills early in the adoption process, actually you're setting yourself to repay the initial cost with the ability to work more efficiently later. Yeah. So it's an investment and it's not an expenditure. That's very important to understand. And then you might need lots of additional BIM tools. For example, AEC collection or Autodesk Construction Cloud for the CD, etc., etc. That's very important. Okay, and then the final one is evaluating and measuring progress, because without this, we will not know where we came after all these efforts. And measuring your success is very important. So it's true that BIM implementation doesn't happen overnight, that which I said initially. So in that BIM implementation process, make sure to set aside time to evaluate what went right and what went wrong, because lessons learned registered is very important. Because my 5th BIM project is not going to be like the first one. I'm going to fly in the sky with my 5th BIM project based on my lessons learned. So the key here is that BIM implementation is a process, one that requires constant reflection. So keep your goals in mind and substantiate them with questions like, if I didn't achieve my goal, what steps can I take next time? So other opportunities to take BIM a step further. So can my BIM templates and documents be reworked? So it is important to remember that BIM is scalable. That's very important, because you build on fundamental knowledge. With each successive project, you gain knowledge, and over time, the benefits of your investment pay off significantly. So the key thing to remember here is BIM is scalable. Start small, grow big along with the projects. That's advice to SMEs, small and medium scale enterprises. So these 4 keys can really boost your confidence in the BIM implementation process. Either it's mandated by the government or mandated by the owner of the project, or the organization itself decides to adapt BIM to improve its internal process, doesn't matter. So these 4 keys will really, really help any organization to have success in BIM adoption and implementation. Yeah. Thank you for that opportunity, Thomas.
Thank you so much. That's a very comprehensive, but still with some very clear and practical advice for our listeners. So I appreciate that. I'd like to invite David, who's asked to hand over the word to you as well, and your reflections to round us
up. Thanks, Thomas. And what Darakash said was very comprehensive. I'd like to sort of go up a level and to say that there are 2 ways that change occurs. It's push and pull, and the push is the mandates, the improved training, and so forth. The things that Darakash has mentioned quite a bit about, and I think others will contribute on that as well. I'd like to think about the pull, and there was a quote by somebody called William Gibson in 2003, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." So these, we've talked about in this discussion already, we've talked about computational design, we talked about artificial intelligence, we've talked about, or I mentioned blockchain, smart contracts, sensors, IoT, digital twins. All of these things are not going to be uninvented. They are here, but they're not evenly distributed at the moment. But one of the things that Darakash said is that BIM is a first step. And BIM is the digitalization of construction, design and construction information is a first step to exploit all of these future technologies. So that will be the pull. It will be inevitable that we'll have to have what we've been calling BIM, the digitalization of information relating to construction and use of buildings and infrastructure. It's inevitable because we need it to exploit these technologies as other sectors are exploiting them. That's the pull. The push is, I guess, can come in many ways, most of which have been more eloquently put by Darakash, and I'll pass on to others to talk about those. Thanks.
Thank you. Again, a very relevant intervention and some good points that map back to what we've talked about today about motivation and how to really drive change. I think these are really 2 really important sides of the same coin, so to speak. So thank you. I see that Hannah is also wanting to add to our conclusions here, so I'll let you pick up and continue.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. I really appreciate all of those informations. In my opinion, I think that spread awareness about the importance of BIM implementation as a culture. So BIM as a culture, first of all. Secondly, as a path, we have to learn, provide tools by doing training sessions and consultancy missions on AEC as industry and education sector. First of all, the education sector is the best tool, a way to provide the learning path from the university. In the third point, practicing development of BIM as a process. It's based on coordination and sharing data with cloud solutions. Then certifying. It's about certifying learners and institutions on BIM tools and softwares. And as a final point, the adoption of mandated BIM in project in governmental institutions. This is the main points. Thank you.
Thank you also to you again. Couldn't agree more, and I think it links together with what we talked about in this call, so appreciate the reflections. I'll continue with handing over to Paul, who also wants to add a perspective.
Thank you, Thomas. I just want to pick up on a couple of points there. Firstly, point that that Tharekesh made earlier, which is that it's very important to understand perspectives when we are teaching BIM and when we're defining an educational strategy for BIM. I think I'd go one stage further as well and just acknowledge that the drivers and barriers for BIM adoption vary considerably depending upon your role within an organization. So not just what your organization does, but where you are within that. And we see lots of different worries, concerns, excitement, depending upon whether you're the CEO, the CFO, the kind of, you know, the information production team, or the BIM manager. You know, you've got to sort of take into consideration the cultural aspects and and mitigate the fear that might exist within these different parties if you're really going to see BIM adopted successfully. And so we need to understand that you know, people will be frightened of this. They will sort of see this as being undermining their experience and their capability that might be, you know, 20, 30 years in the making, to then sort of suddenly be back down to asking the office junior how to do things, is a frightening step forward, but it's a reality of this. And we need to accommodate that. We need to find ways of kind of empowering those people that have still got a lot to offer. But you know, we can't just say, right, you know, this new guy that's 21 years old is going to be the BIM lead for this team, when that 21-year-old doesn't have a clue about how to put a building together. But the old guy in the corner of the room that fumbles about with one finger typing has the most to offer. He just needs to be encouraged in the right way. And I think that's a real big sort of barrier that we've got to overcome, because that guy's got the ear of the board. That old guy can turn around and say, this thing's not working. Let's get rid of it. Go back to the way we used to do things. And he's respected, he's listened to. So you've got to overcome those sorts of issues before we go in. I think another point I'd make is one I kind of mentioned before, but you know, as David just highlighted, that BIM is the first step in that digitization approach. But I'd like to point out a fact, which is that 99% of the world's built assets are already here, and they don't have digital information compiled for them. You know, we've got buildings that are thousands of years old that have no BIM data. We've got a very, very small quantity of buildings where we actually have usable digital information that we can take into our systems. And so we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we've got to look at ways in which we can incorporate existing building stock into this digitization process. And as such, I think the emphasis has to move towards owners, operators, onto the FM side of how we collate and how we use digital information in the built environment for them to then influence both how we collect data from existing buildings as well as those new fancy BIM models that are coming through in the future. But it's, as I say, it's if you look at a portfolio of buildings for most big corporations, the vast majority of those buildings have been around for a long time, and the drawings are on paper if they exist at all.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I would just like to add to what Paul said. First of all, the very important, the key takeaway for me from what Paul said was when it comes into people, process, and technology, I need to put people in the front, which is very important for me during my digital transformation, because it's a disruptive technology. I need to give them lots of confidence to come over this catastrophe where they move from one technology to another. That's very, very important. That's rightly said. And that's a part of a key thing to remember while adapting and transforming to digital. And another thing is it's very interesting. Again, another key takeaway from Paul is that 99% of the assets are already built, which is existing. So when when I do lectures in university, this is something which is very interesting. And I always tell the students, when you talk about the benefits of BIM, it's never ending, isn't it? The state-of-the-art benefits of clash deductions, knowing things about even before they are built, the insights, it goes on. But for me, I always go back to the basics. So what I inform the students are if you look at the 14th to 17th century architects, or the architecture which was there in 14th to 17th. For example, if you look at some of the famous architectural monuments in Italy and so, these were built by master masons like Filippo Brunelleschi, Giovanni Bernini, Francesco Borromini, etc. How this happened, they required very less number of blueprints to do these buildings. No computers, nothing. So how this was possible? Because these famous architects were brought up in the tradition of building. They were masons by themselves, and they had an integral knowledge of how buildings were constructed, and building techniques were deeply embedded inside the construction trades. Yeah. So these masons were involved in all facets of design and construction. But then what happened over time, the construction industry got solidified with the invention of reinforced concrete. The design department separated and the construction got separated, and we had to think what was actually happening in the construction site. So these architects who are closely associated with their building tradition got separated. But what BIM did to me was to bring back this and take me back to the 14th and 17th century, where instead of me being closely with the building is closely being with me, or the asset is closely being with me in my computers, which is an informative digital twin, or let's say it's the early stage of digital twin during my upfront engineering process, which travels across and becomes an informative digital twin with COBie data attached. Then it becomes a performing digital twin with the live physical data from the building being fed into it. And then the industry 4.0, as David said, is dreaming of an autonomous digital twin which performs by itself. But then at least we are there up to the level of informative digital twin. So always I go back to the basics of always enjoying the benefits of BIM, even though it has multitude benefits to talk about for more than 24 hours. But then for me, the fundamentals basics is it takes me back to the 14th and 17th century, where we were very close to the building tradition, and the traditions of design and construction was not separated. It's coming back. So that's my 2 cents on that. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you again and again. Breathtaking perspectives, but very relevant, and all about collaboration and working together, I think. I see that we also like to invite Juan to add your reflections on both this conversation and the meeting as a whole, or the conversation as a whole.
Oh yes, I think that the information that has been given in this last point, I think, is very comprehensive. I don't have much to add. Probably a point that I would like to maybe insist a little bit what I said earlier is about the fact of BIM is not being seen as an add-on. So I think that's something that comes from the education from the top management of the different stakeholders involved in the AEC industry. We still see a lot of companies relying on production centers, outsourcing companies for BIM modeling. And I think that completely misunderstands the concept of what BIM is. And I think that once we see, I think that I'm going to be a bit polemic saying this, but I think once we see disappearing these outsourcing companies or production centers, then I think that we'll be successful in the implementation of BIM because it will be already embedded in the way that we design, build, and operate.
Thank you. It's again all about the full process and the approach of you know, going at it broadly from the start. And I see that our final 6 panelists is eager to add to this as well. So Habib, I will invite you to add your perspective also.
I promise I'll make it short, as usual. I just have to agree with Hannah Alouche with all the educational issues that we need to tackle in general, because this is the basis of everything that we are based on in our modern civilization. So if we manage to implement the concept of BIM in our constitutions, in our educational constitution, then this will be a promising approach as a whole. And of course, this will impose in a way, when you have all this amount of youth graduated with all these degrees, this will impose in a way the governments to act and try to keep this amount of asset inland to prevent those assets to migrate and work elsewhere. This, I'm just speaking of the MENA region, and of course, since this is our major topic, and what I would in a way encourage is the bone of the new identity, because everything, all the BIM many BIM processes are being showering us with multiple theories. I would encourage maybe try to find common ground to create a new identity for this MENA region, so that that is based on multiple existing projects, and in collaboration with the syndicates of engineering in multiple MENA countries, to have this kind of unity with the standardization, which is a long-term process. Of course, we have multiple things happening in the region, not only with the engineering part and the educational parts, but hoping this will at least be one of the racing horses in the field. That's what I would say in general. I'm not going to say further than that.
No, but thank you. I think that's it's actually a good way of maybe rounding off the conversation, because I think a lot of what unites us here is around education, training, being in sync with the technology development, and that there's absolutely nothing to be scared of in that sense, because we have comprehensive and good training and education programs, and we can really drive this forward. So I may not attempt to summarize all of the recommendations, because I think if we covered both very practical, but then also more strategic and the vision side of where we're going in industry. But I do want to thank all of you for contributing to that. And I think you've surely have given the listeners a lot of interesting food for thought and ideas, hopefully, that they can take forward. With that said, I would like to round off this conversation once again, thanking each and one of our panelists. We truly appreciate that you could join us today and could really share, as said, both a very strategic view on where you're seeing big ticket items such as mandates and standards are going down to we've had conversation around some very practical advice around how to think about implementing BIM in work processes. So I appreciate the breadth and depth that you brought to this conversation. I'd also like to thank the attendees who've listened to us. I hope that you agree with my summary, that we've heard a lot of interesting thought nuggets here, and that this is something that you can take forward in your work. Speaking about that, one factor that does unite everyone again that's here in this call is that we are part of the Autodesk network. BIM is of course broader and bigger than Autodesk, but their technology forms a part in it. That's why our activities are gathered in our Autodesk space on our website, but I would like to encourage all the attendees to check out our website. There's some interesting reports on the state of the union, what's going on in the market. There will be follow-up activities from this session here that you can see on our social media and our websites. Even if your interest is broader than just the technology itself and actually about overall in industry. So with that said, thank you again, and hope to see you soon again.